Oh, good morning, everybody. I'll tell you what, I can tell already, it's very different standing here to standing there. I feel like I want to put your guitar on, Nick, to make me feel more at home. And then Adam comes over and he puts this thing on your head. He's like, just relax, strap this contraption on. It's a bit like going to the dentist, isn't it? And they're going, oh, just calm down while sharpening their knives that they're going to use. But that said, genuinely, I am, and no one's more surprised by this than me, but I am excited to bring what I feel God has put on my heart to share today. I think before going any further, I want to pray. I want to start with some prayer. So Father, I thank you. I thank you that we can come before you this morning. God, we come before the God who created everything. God, you are all powerful, yet you care about us. And I can't get my head around that. God, you love us so much. And God, we come with our baggage, with our history. We come with our tangled necklaces. And we come before the one who is the chief untangler. And God, we've had the picture in recent weeks about cars needing to go to a mechanic. God, you are our chief mechanic. And we come before you this morning with our hearts open, ready for you to go to business on us. God, we don't want to leave here the same. But God, change us today, I pray. Amen. I was chatting with Michelle over recent weeks saying, how do you start a preach? No idea. How do you start a preach? So I said, I know. Why don't I tell a joke? Get everyone laughing. And she's like, no, don't tell a joke. I'm like, it's all right. I can be really funny. I've done best man speeches in the past. I know how to tell a joke. And she's like, no, that's just not appropriate at all. So I'm not going to tell you a joke. We've got, hopefully, we've got some quotes coming up on the screen. There we go. So, I'm going to read a couple of quotes. So the first one's by Carl Friedrich Gauss, and I've learnt many lessons while preparing this. The first is to make sure you know how to pronounce the names. So we're going with Carl Friedrich Gauss. He said, when our last hour sounds, we will have the great and ineffable joy of seeing the one whom we can only glimpse in all our work. And the second one's by Isaac Newton. We know him. He said, this most beautiful system of the sun, the planets, and the comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. Now, the reason I've read these quotes will hopefully become clear as we go. Now, as you know, we're going through a series on grace, and I've been asked to speak on living under grace today. But I think to know how we live under grace, we first need to know what grace is. And to know what grace is, I believe we need to know who God is. So I want to start by taking a bit of a step back, because I want to make sure we right-size God in our minds today. Now, I heard a preach, many, many years ago now, and I've never forgotten it. That sometimes you hear a preach and it's one of those preaches that you just remember forever. This was one of those for me. I think it's no understatement to say that it shaped my understanding of God and of grace to this day. It's by an American pastor, you might have heard of him, called Louis Giglio. It's called Indescribable. And he starts by reading Psalm 19, and it says this: the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. And he basically goes on to deliver a lesson on astronomy to those he's speaking to. So stay with me. I'm going to attempt to deliver some of what he said to you now. Now, I didn't, many of you who know me know this, I didn't pay attention in school. I didn't pay attention in science or, is it physics? I don't even know. I don't know what lesson I didn't pay attention to speak to this, but I'm taking what he said in good faith. So if we could have the next slides. This is a picture of the Milky Way galaxy. I don't know how well you can see that with the lights, but this is the Milky Way galaxy. Now, we live on Earth. I'm all right so far, which is in the Milky Way galaxy. And I think it's about here somewhere. Does anyone know? Yeah, we'll go with that then. It's about there somewhere. So this is the Milky Way galaxy, and there are billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Billions of stars. And the Milky Way galaxy is our subdivision of the universe. There are hundreds of billions of other subdivisions in the known universe. Hundreds of billions of other Milky Way galaxies, essentially. We've got billions of stars in our subdivision, and hundreds of billions of other subdivisions. It's massive, isn't it? I can't get my head around that already. I'm struggling with this already. And we look at Genesis 1. Isaac's snoring. We look at Genesis 1, and I've got some quotes from the Message version of it here, which says this. First, God created the heavens and the earth. And if we skip a few verses forward, we read, God spoke, lights come out, shine in heaven's sky. It just sounds, I read that, I think that just sounds so simple. Lights come out, shine. And that's what happens when God says that. But God spoke the earth that we're in, our Milky Way galaxy, and all the other subdivisions of the universe, including the billions of stars, into existence. The God that we worship is big. Now, light travels at 180,000 miles per second. 180,000 miles per second. Now, our Milky Way galaxy is 100,000 light years across. So if you want to go from that side to that side of the Milky Way galaxy, you have to travel at 180,000 miles per second for 100,000 years. And that's just one of the subdivisions that God created. God spoke that into being. And whilst preparing this message, I was reminded of the verse in Psalms, and I think Will said it last time he spoke, which is, as far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. And I often read that without the intended sense of scale here. God hasn't removed them just to there. They're not just so far away that we can still see them to serve as a reminder of how bad we really are. That's not what the psalmist is saying here. As far as the east is from the west, he's removed them so far that we can never be defined by them. So one of the billions of stars in our Milky Way galaxy is the sun. So that's just one of the billions of stars in our galaxy. And I remember going on holiday, again, a long time ago with Michelle to South Africa, thinking, wow, it is hot here. It was oppressively hot for someone that's used to this being as good as it gets in West Moors. But that sun that I found so hot, it was then and it is now 93 million miles away from the Earth. 93 million miles away. That is 100 times the diameter of Earth. And it's 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface. 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface. And again in Genesis we read, God made two big lights. That's just a big light. The larger to take charge of the day and the smaller to be in charge of the night. God spoke that sun into existence. Cannot think that this God we worship is a weak God. Someone that we just call upon when we feel bad about something and he'll just swoop in and sort it out. Our God speaks stars into being. He is big. So we've taken a quick look at the Milky Way galaxy and the sun. But as we know, there are hundreds of billions of other subdivisions in the known universe. Another of these is the Whirlpool galaxy. Now, to get here, you've got to travel at the speed of light. So we now know that is, how fast is it? 180,000 miles a second. But you've got to go 180,000 miles a second for 31 million years. So this is 31 million light years away from us. That's mad, isn't it? So I really struggle with a sense of scale now. That is a long way from us here. And I think we can sometimes put limits on what we think God can do. I know that I definitely do that. But then I look at the scale of the known universe, and it's known universe, isn't it? Because we don't know what else is out there, so known universe. I look at what God created. I look at the sun. I look at the galaxies. I just start to feel a bit ridiculous for putting any limitations on what I think God can do. He is big. And you get the point I'm driving home here. He's big. He's bigger than we sometimes give him credit for. Then Louis says we're going to go really far out, and he brings another picture up on his screen. And I remember seeing this for the first time and just being overwhelmed by it. So this is the next image that he brings up. The God we worship, the God who spoke the universe into existence. The God who created light and everything we've just seen. He came to earth to die on a cross that he created. You see, grace says, I'll come down to a world I created. I'll come down to a people that I created in my image, whom I love. To be tortured, to be murdered by the people that I love, so that my people, so that us here today, we can be reconciled to the Father and spend forever in eternity with him. God is big, and that is grace. And there's a song by Casting Crowns called East to West, which says it perfectly, and it echoes the psalm I mentioned earlier. It says, I know you've cast my sin as far as the east is from the west, and I stand before you now as though I've never sinned. Jesus, can you show me just how far the east is from the west? Because I can't bear to see the man I've been and come rising up in me again. In the arms of your mercy I find rest, because you know just how far the east is from the west, from one scarred hand to the other. From one scarred hand to the other. See, the truth is it doesn't matter physically how far east is from west. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's a long way. We know that. We've seen the galaxies. We've seen how fast light travels. It is a long way, but it doesn't matter. The east is there on one scarred hand. The west is there on the other. And there is nothing that can close that gap. So God is big. He loves us so much that he sent his son to die for us. And this is grace. So with that in mind, I think let's take a look at the passage that we're reading from today. So we're looking at Ephesians 3. If you've got Bibles on you, turn to it. We're looking at 1 to 10, but we're going to start with 1 to 6. So Ephesians 3, 1 to 6. It says this, For this reason I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ Jesus, for the sake of you Gentiles. Surely you have heard about the administration of God's grace that was given me for you. That is the mystery made known to me by revelation, as I have already written briefly. Now in reading this then, you will be able to understand my insight into the mystery of Christ, which was not made known to people in other generations, as it has now been revealed by the Spirit to God's holy apostles and prophets. This mystery is that through the gospel, the Gentiles are heirs together with Israel, members together of one body, and sharers together in the promise of Christ Jesus. I think it's fair to say that we all like to be included. We like to be in the know, don't we? You don't want to be on the outside looking in. You want to be in the know. Now, I'm not up to speed with, frankly, anything current. I don't get social media. I'm not on Facebook. You know, often we do things at the weekend and someone will say on a Sunday, I see you went here yesterday. I'm like, I did, but how do you know that? I don't get it. I'm pretty rubbish with technology as well. The fact this works is down to Zach. And I'm certainly not in tune with the latest lingo that Thomas comes home with. I heard someone say FOMO recently, which, again, I didn't know what it meant. So I now know fear of missing out. And I see that in my children massively. You know, anytime we try and do something, there's a little voice going, what are you saying? What was that? What are you doing? If one of them has something, the other wants exactly the same thing. In fact, just yesterday, cereal. This is a big one for us, cereal. I had to weigh the cereal to make sure they had exactly the same amount of cereal in each bowl. It's madness. I know, I did it. Yeah, I went along with it. A lot more. They've got gangs at school as well, and to be in the gangs, you've got to have the right thing. But I totally get this. I used to love, I think I've mentioned this a few times, I used to love riding motorbikes. Everything about it, the adrenaline rush you get, the gear, you know, the gloves, the boots. I had like white leathers, I looked like some stormtrooper when I put it all on, but I absolutely loved it. But also the camaraderie. So when you ride past another motorbike, you can guarantee like a little sideward nod all the time. I loved that. But not any bike got that. You needed a proper motorbike to get the nod. If you ride past a scooter, there's no nod happening there. It's got to be a proper bike. I loved that. If we look at this passage that we've just read, until this point, to be in the club, and the club being those who inherit the promises of God, you had to be a Jew. You couldn't just buy an item of clothing. You can't buy a different type of motorbike. You have to be a Jew. If you're not a Jew, you're not getting in. However, we now read that through the gospel, the Gentiles are heirs together with Israel and share in the promise of Christ. We read in Romans 4 that the promise is not only for the people that live under the law of Moses, it's for anyone who lives with faith like Abraham. So we read that not only is God's grace available to the Jew, but it's now available to the Gentiles too. And I think we can often read about people groups like Jews and Gentiles, and we just feel removed from it. That doesn't apply to us here. But I think we can miss the significance of what's going on. For most, if not all of us here today, we are Gentiles, we're not Jews. Now, if the promises of God remained for the Jews only, if you had to be a Jew to be in this Christian club, we wouldn't be in there, and we'd be condemned to an eternity separated from Jesus. So this is big news for us. We're included in the promises of God, and his grace extends to us. So God is big, and his grace is available to all. Shall we go to the next slide, if that's all right? It gives away my next few points, but can't get technology right all the time, can we? So the next point I want to make, as you can see, don't count yourself out. If we go back to the passage, so Ephesians 3, and we're going to pick up from 7 and read through to 10. So it says this: I became a servant of this gospel by the gift of God's grace, given me through the working of his power. Although I am less than the least of all the Lord's people, this grace was given me to preach to the Gentiles the boundless riches of Christ, and to make plain to everyone the administration of this mystery, which for ages past was kept hidden in God, who created all things. Now his intent was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. Now here we see Paul referred to himself as less than the least of all the Lord's people. See, Paul did things before coming to Christ that he surely regrets doing. We read in 1 Corinthians 15 that he persecuted the church. Acts 8 tells us that Paul approved of Stephen's killing and that he sent other Christians to prison because of their faith. And you can imagine that some Christians might have renounced their faith at the hands of the persecution received. How must he feel about that? Yet despite that, God met with Paul and completely changed the direction of his life. And there's a Christian band called Switchfoot, and I remember once hearing why they called themselves Switchfoot. I think they're all keen surfers, and if you want a surfboard and you switch your feet, I guess you'd face in completely the other direction. And that's what God did with Paul. He turned him from persecuting the church to facing the other direction and being imprisoned for his faith. Paul didn't deserve God's grace. He knew it. He knew he didn't deserve it. And we don't deserve God's grace either. Another quote from Louis Giglio, who seems to be my favourite preacher at the moment. But he said, if you don't think you deserve another chance from God, you need to remember that you didn't deserve the first one either. You didn't deserve the first one either. Paul didn't deserve it, and we don't deserve it, but God. And how many times are we grateful for these but God statements? But God poured his grace on Paul in abundance, as he does on us in abundance. There's no hesitation. We don't need to have done anything. We don't need to do anything other than put our faith in Jesus, because he's done it all. He's done it all for us. So Paul could quite easily have counted himself out. He could have said, I've done so many terrible things, God won't use me. And we can think of many other examples of biblical characters. He could have done exactly the same thing. And Moses could have counted himself out. He wasn't the best speaker. He committed murder. Matthew was a tax collector, considered a traitor by the Jews. Simon Peter acted before thinking. David was an adulterer and a murderer as well. These Bible characters that we see as heroes of the faith all had reasons that they could have counted themselves out. On a personal note, I grew up in this church. I remember chasing my friends around, some of them here now, as my kids now do, and causing havoc just as they did. I got baptised here. I expect Don was there heating the water up like 12 hours before I got baptised. I ran youth groups here, met Michelle here as well, and supported Alpha. And as Adam said, I've played the guitar here more times than I could possibly count. Another memory Adam always likes to remind me of is that I was a deacon here. Those mugs that apparently are too heavy, that's my fault, so sorry. I was rubbish at it. It's just, yeah, still sore. But yeah, just not my skill set being a deacon. But one thing I've never done here or anywhere is preach. I've always been pretty sure that I just don't want to do it. I don't want to preach. But Adam said, do you want to preach? I don't know why. I said yes. I don't know where that came from, but I said yes. And we're covering a series on grace now. And I believe God gives us grace at different points in our life to push out into new areas of obedience. And I think maybe this is one for me. So here's my challenge to you. What are you counting yourself out of today? Has God been leading you into a new area of service or obedience recently, but you've been counting yourself out? Has God given you grace to enter into something new this year? A phrase that stuck with me since Commission Festival is, what gifts are you not using? Keeps coming back to me. I just can't get it out of my head, and I just don't believe it's only for me. So what gifts are you not using? What gifts do you have? What passions has God given you that aren't being used for him at the moment? Now, if there's something coming to mind, and I bet there is for most here, I bet there is something coming to mind, I urge you, don't count yourself out. It doesn't matter what you've done in the past. It doesn't matter how bad we consider ourselves to be. God has done it all. God's done it all for us. All we have to do is say, yes, God. Yes, God, I trust you. I trust your grace is sufficient for me. Our God is big. His grace is available to all. So who are we to count ourselves out of that? So what did living under grace look like for Paul then? So verse 8, we read, this grace was given me to preach to the Gentiles the boundless riches of Christ. So for Paul, living under grace was proclaiming Jesus to others. How do we live under grace then? What does that look like for us here today? We've been shown this undeserved kindness by God, and I love that description of it. I think that came up. Laura mentioned it in life group, undeserved kindness. Such a great definition of grace. We've been shown this undeserved kindness by God. We're shown it every day. It's in everything we do. It's all around us. And we see this most prominently in the cross. Because of this undeserved kindness we've been shown, we're released to show that undeserved kindness to other people. And Michelle's really good at this. She's always building relationships with people and finding ways to help. You know, we're constantly going to pick up bits and pieces from different places and drop them off at different people's houses. And I've discovered where she gets this from recently. It's from her dad. So he heard about a family recently who, what was it they needed? They needed a bed. So he just said, yeah, go to DFS, buy a bed, and I'll pay for it. So he's never met this family, never met them before, but he's just sent them off to the shop and said, yeah, just get what you need and I'll pay for it. And that challenged me. Nothing we have on this earth is ours. We only get to steward it by the grace of God. I think Phil has grasped this. I think Michelle has grasped this. But when we get it, and I find this so challenging, our lives should be radically different from those who are not living for Christ. So I'll wrap up here. So, band, I don't know if you guys have got another song, probably a good time to come back. But I just want to stay on that for a moment. Is it true for us? If we honestly take a look at how we live, can we say that our lives are radically different from those around us not living for Christ? Are we denying ourselves? Are we preferring others? Or do we let that drawer of comfort creep in, and it so easily does? Have we perhaps become a bit passive in our walk with God? I've been so challenged by this, and I encourage everyone to think about whether this applies to you. So just to summarize the points I want to really draw home today. God is big. Don't try to contain him, because he's bigger and more powerful than we'll ever understand. He loves us so much that he sent his son to die on a cross so that we could spend eternity with him. His grace is available to all of us. Thirdly, we are weak and we are flawed individuals. So it's a really good job that it's not about us. It's all about him. And he can use any one of us here today for his glory. But don't count yourself out of the mission that he's calling you to today. And fourthly, live it out. Live a life of unrivaled kindness, of unrivaled generosity, unrivaled compassion, unrivaled forgiveness and love, because he is so worth it, and he gives us the grace that we need to do it. Thank you.
Woo.